deal with you. If you want to go to the pharmacy, what do you have to give? You have to give your birth date. And so if your birth date is there, they'll give you your prescription. If you don't know it, you don't get it. So those people that have dementia problems, they have to take somebody with them to say what their birthday is, or you can't get the prescription. That's your identity number. You go on any kind of a computer, you have an ID number. You have a PIN number if you go to the bank. These are all kinds of people that want to know who you are.
Oh, it's easy to identify me because my picture is in the post office.
Well, that's another one. That's the next one I'm coming to. It's the next one, state and federal identity. Okay, under the next one, unless we are visitors from outside the state, everybody in here has either had or has a driver's license. That is acceptable in the state of Oregon as a complete identity. You go outside of the state of Oregon to another country, you have to have a passport. Now, the passport in the old days, when I first got my passport, way back in the dark ages, they had on there my tribal identity. Anymore, on my more recent passport, there is no identity. It's just my name. So that, again, but you have to have that. You cannot even go and get a driver's test, any kind of a driver's application, without 2 pieces of identification in Oregon. Again, who wants to know? Now, your identity is an artifact of culture. What is that artifact? Are all those things that are in your billfold. Those little pieces of paper, your social security card, your driver's license, your library notice. You can't check out a book without a library card. Those are all identities. And all of you have, I have a whole stack of them to go and do things that I want to do, but I have to have the proper one. If you are caught in driving and you don't have your registration, immediately you're suspect. So identity is very critical at the state, federally recognized level. Now, the identity that I want to talk to you about today in relation to the federal government is in your note number 3, answer, who wants to know, the federal recognized tribal identity. I am a tribal member, so I have to have an identity if I am going to be recognized by the federal government as a tribal person. And so I have those identities to show you. I carry them with me. Here is the one, the passport. It was tribal at one time, it no longer is. Here's the other one that gives the tribal identity with a seal on it. If I want to register for a conference, this has to go through the computer, and then the reference is made to that identity. In the present time, archaeologists and anthropologists and tribal people have an uneasy relationship. And anthropologists and archaeologists have to be more clear in what they say, because we now are in those meetings. So that you do have to send this through in order to be recognized as that person from that group. This is your voting registration too. It identifies your identity in your tribe. You cannot vote without that registration number. In my tribe, you cannot get a roll number that is yours. It has to come down in history from lineal ancestors. You can get a registration number for voting, and any identity that is required by the tribe. They're very specific about it. All of those identities are very restrictive. The only country in the world, Africa has many tribes too, the only country that has an identity that is acceptable to most tribal people and most countries, they call their tribal people First Nation people. In our country, we call them Indians. And I have been asked many times, how do you feel about the term Indian? And I say I really don't find it useful because it doesn't go anywhere. It is a misnomer that Christopher Columbus didn't know his geography, so he misnamed things. The people from India don't like it because we're not Indians. So the Canadian use of the word First Nation is more applicable, or tribal identity. So let's go through that kind of thing and see what we can learn about it. The reason it's not useful, the idea of Indian, there are 600, almost 600 now, federally recognized tribes. That means that the federal government, and each year it changes, because some of the tribes that were required to relinquish their tribal identity over time, with the help of anthropologists, other tribes, and archaeologists, have been able to be reinstated. The Grand Ronde, right down the road, so to speak, were not federally recognized. All of the people in anthropology and archaeology in the state, all the lawyers in the state, all the tribes in the state worked hard to get Grand Ronde re-recognized as a tribal identity.
Why?
It really was, they were economically destitute. All of those people in that area were destitute, and only by being recognized could they move into the area of gambling. It was an economic necessity, because when you're tribes, you have certain identities that you can use in being economically self-sufficient. Otherwise, you're not going to do very well. Now, the next thing that I think would be of interest to you, let's turn the page. The identity of tribes not only includes geography, land concessions, and the linguistic properties are also very important. And how much do you use your language? What is your language? How can you go about getting that language so that it is helpful to you? In the tribe that I belong to is made up of 3 parts. I sometimes think I go to the Baptist church, and if anybody doesn't like what's going on into the Baptist church, they just go out and form another chapter. You know, we got this Baptist and that Baptist and this Baptist and the Baptist over there. And so each one goes on. We can't do that when we form these nations. So we have 3 divisions based on the relationship with the federal government. The first identity is the identity that has to go with Oklahoma Indian Territory identity. That is the major Cherokee Nation. The second identity is the North Carolina identity, that in the Indian Removal Act from the southeast to the Indian Territory, they gave up many things at that time. Over time and legal action, Cherokees are very legalistically oriented. They know how to run the law. So it was agreed then among the Cherokee groups. The North Carolina is part of the Cherokee Nation. The Indian Territory people are part of the Cherokee Nation. The other people that are part of the Cherokee Nation are what we call quietly the most conservative of the Cherokees, and those are the United Katuah clans. They are ultra conservative. That means Cherokee marries Cherokee. They do not marry outside.
I can't hear you very well.
Could you move over here then, please? So it's really remarkable that we managed to get along with those three kinds of divisions, because it could be very difficult to form three different geographical disparate areas in order to make a regular tribal government that is capable of accomplishing things. So let's go back and find out when this relation started with the government. The first one was with De Soto. He came wandering through the country, and that was the first contact. The second one, which many people don't know and don't realize how long we've been at this business of trying to remain Cherokee, and if you'll return to your chart, the black chart, signed its first treaty with England in 1721. It's been a long time in this relationship. Now, in the treaties with England and Great Britain, the treaties there were probably, if you were to use the term, probably the acculturation with the Cherokee was with the Great Britain. They became very British-oriented in relation to their perspective. So that acculturation, not only did the acculturation occur, but because you had the military here from the British, there was the intermarriage that started. And so there is not only the genetic aspect of that, and it's an interesting part of history. And usually the Cherokee Nation goes back to determine your ancestry to 1721. It does not go to 1540. So that in determining that, then you go to 1785. This is another place that you can see what your identity is. That's the first treaty with the United States. Then in 1821, Sequoyah, who is the Cherokee who developed the means of making us literate in a language that we could use, he developed the syllabary for the Cherokee Nation. This made us a literate nation. This set us on the path of the legal patterns that we took in the country. That is the only thing that I can think that makes us different from other tribes in our negotiations with the government. We learned how to use the pattern of law. It didn't do us all that much good sometimes, but we did learn how to do it. All right, now in 1827, we ratified a constitution. We had our own constitutional government in the Cherokee Nation. I don't know, we are an Iroquoian speaker. We're the only Iroquoian speaker outside of the Iroquois Nation. Now, I don't know whether that says we're hard to get along with or that we just want our way. Anyway, I have no explanation for why that happened, but that's the truth of the matter. Now, in that, most of the Cherokee people at that time, even up to the Civil War, up to the especially Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the Cherokee Nation has been at odds with the government. Much of the Cherokee Nation were in favor of the British in the Civil War. Much of the Cherokee Nation was in favor of the South in the Civil War. So because of that disagreement with the government, we had to pay heavy-duty reparations. And so it cost us a lot. So that in the major problem then in determining and staying Cherokee occurred in your chart. You'll see 1838. That was the major problem. And that was when Andrew Jackson was president. We became removed from the Southeast. He wanted the land. He wanted to move into Oklahoma. It was called Indian Territory in those days. And there were two segments there. Some of the Cherokees saw the handwriting on the wall, and they moved to Oklahoma early on. They knew what was going to happen because they knew Andrew Jackson better than other people knew what his intentions were. And so they moved to Indian Territory in the Arkansas, what is now the Arkansas area. And so the Arkansas area and the Indian Territory area in the common language of the Cherokee became known as Lapland, because it kind of lapped over into other kinds of places where the rules were not quite as clear. Then the Curtis Act was another attempt that was to try to get rid of the Cherokee identity. We survived that. Then we got down to, let me go to the 1900s with the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act was the act that was the final, probably the final attempt to the government to destroy the identity of the Cherokee. The Dawes Act tried to get rid of all the property that Cherokees owned and to make it individual ownership. And so that was to break the notion of a nation at that time. And so if you cannot now get a roll number, my father in my family line is the one that was old enough was born in 1905 that could have a roll number. And we get what I call a registration number. If you go to Warm Springs has a census number. They have an actual number that is their identity, and they have a voting process for being a member of that tribe. Each tribe has their own way of determining membership. And so everyone then that wants to be a member in our group has to trace back to the lineal ancestors that you have. If you have a lineal ancestor, and remember we are matrilineal. So if you are matrilineal, that means the woman owns the children, she has the right of divorce, she owns the property. She is Big Mama. And so you grow up thinking that. So your behavior and your work style all go back to that. I was always amused when Wilma Mankiller, who's on here, was elected chief of the Cherokee. It's the only tribe that has a chief that's a female. And the feminists thought that she was, the feminist. It wasn't feminism at all. It was the matrilineal Cherokee way of governance. That if you find that at some time you're the one that is responsible, you have to move and take that responsibility. And the people recognized that and voted her in. It's an interesting phenomenon how other people read different things. Now, the other thing with this chart on this page is Bill John Baker, which is the principal chief. All of the chiefs, since we have organized and we have our constitution, we have our tribal identity, all of us outsiders who are not in Cherokee territory, we have our governmental representative in the Cherokee government. The chief comes out to check on us. We have our own elected official within that governmental organization, and we are kept abreast of what's going on in the nation. There is none of this casual notion of gossip or any of that. It's public information for everybody. And if it isn't well written, then he comes out at least once or twice a year. Our representative comes out and we meet with them to see what the problems may be from our viewpoint. There is no, for us that are outsiders, there is not much of a, what shall I say, an economic advantage. It is strictly a cultural advantage. We walk, those of us that are outside, walk two paths. Wherever we are, we walk that path, but we also walk the Cherokee path. And you have to be sure you keep in balance with those two paths. And you cross language, you cross attitudes, you cross notions of beliefs of what the cosmology is of the world. All of those are notions that you have to deal with. Now, the Cherokee Nation, I wrote on it, there's on another page, that it just says what the Cherokee person who lives in Indian Territory has available to them. The only thing that has come out recently that to outsiders outside of the Cherokee Nation, since the economic resources of the nation are being well managed now and doing very well and benefiting the people, they put in a process whereby if you want a home and you're an outside Cherokee but a recognized citizen of the nation, then you may apply for mortgage or borrowing money for housing, because housing is very high on the list for all Cherokees, proper housing. We don't want any homeless Cherokees wandering around. We want them in houses, want them to have a place to live. And so that is very high on our list of economic securities for the tribal members. So let's go through now, and on the next page, how do you get a Cherokee identity? What is it about being a Cherokee identity that we people still want? So the first thing you do, it's a very elaborate process. This book is the main book for determining that kind of a role. I know many people who come to me constantly saying, I'm Cherokee, but I cannot be, they will not accept me. And I say, what did you do? Did you look at any of this material to find out where your lineal ancestors may be? What is your identity? Which role, what was the last role that the lineal ancestor was on? Because I said, this is what they're going by. They're not going by DNA. They're not going by the archaeological that dug up a fossil in China that said tribal people came from China 40,000 years ago. They're not going by that. They're going by what their relationship is with the government. All those treaties that I went over with you, that's what they're going by. And so it's all in here. And for heaven's sakes, don't tell them that your grandmother was an Indian princess. That goes in the garbage immediately. I mean, we have no monarchy. We're very common people. We don't elevate ourselves above anybody. And so the next thing is don't refer to the Cherokee as a reservation place. We have no reservations. Remember, our treaty started back in 1721. So it's always been a nation status. And so those two things will get you in the barrel right off. And I don't know what you can do to rectify it. But the other problem, and if you have that identity and you want to keep it, since America is a patrilineal society, not a matrilineal society, when you marry, be sure that any tribe or any group, when you marry, keep your own family identity. Because what happened to many Cherokee people, and I feel sorry for them because I think they're legitimate Cherokees, but they cannot provide the data. And the data, whenever you marry in the patrilineal society, you take the male surname. In our society, you keep the female name. My name is Redbird-Smith because Redbird is my tribal name. Smith is my married surname. And one person said, well, that isn't an Indian name. I said, what's your name? And he gave me a name, and I said, you were anglicized in language at Ellis Island. That's not your real name either. Because I said, the government can't spell. And you figure that out. So every time you come in a difficult name, you anglicize it into something like Jones or Smith. And that's what happened to all the people at Warm Springs when they went to school at Chemawa. Names were changed to Smith, and none of them are related. And so I'm a Redbird-Smith. And if you don't watch that, even with my little brother, and he was born, the two tribes that are intermarried in my family are what's called the Wazazi, or in contemporary terms, the Osage. One of them came to my parents and they said, if it's a boy, he said, if it's a boy, would you be willing to give him my full name? And my parents respected him and liked him. We were getting along then. You know, at first we killed each other. Then we began to marry, and so we fought in a different kind of way after that. So he said, would you be willing to do that? And my parents respected him a lot and said yes. So my brother comes out being named Waken Iron Redbird. No end of trouble, because everybody in Indian Territory knows Waken Iron is an Osage name. Redbird is a Cherokee name. So it's suspect when it comes across the line. If he didn't have his lineal ancestors, he would have had real trouble. But he's got his lineal ancestors, he knows who they are, and it did present him some trouble, though, every now and then. Now, whenever you are a registered tribal person, you don't ever say you're a tribal person. In identity is very difficult for people that are of Cherokee ancestry, we outside people, because we don't flaunt identity. And so in my colleagues, my last 24 years of professional life, my colleagues were all male. And we did a lot of field work around the world. And so we would be on a plane. If we were going north, I was an Eskimo. If we were going to Mexico, I was a Mexican. And I was always asked if I spoke English. If we went to Japan or China or Micronesia, always a problem with identity. Who are you? And most Japanese think I'm Japanese. Most Chinese think I'm Chinese. When I was going to Korea, the people at Korea said, it's time to get off the plane. I said, I'm not going. I'm not Korean. And they were really upset that I wasn't Korean, because that was the identity. And I think that's a long time ago. I was just walking and shopping in Winco, what's it been, last week. And a person comes up to me and say, don't I know you? And I look at her and I say, I don't think so. And she said, aren't you from the islands? And I said, no, not yet. So it's amazing that the identity, and so my colleagues finally saw it as a joke. They said, well, who are you today? And I don't know, whatever they think. Now, why would we want tribal identity? What is our reason for that? The reason is it is the foundation for our basic belief system, for how we behave. We still carry that. We've been influenced by Christianity, but not completely. We're still Cherokee. All right, now what are those? And you really have to be careful with this, because don't believe me too much, because some Cherokees ain't there yet, so watch out. All right, the first thing we believe is that change is normal. That's on your next to your last page. Change is normal. We expect change, and we expect the challenge. We know it's going to happen. Now, how do you know that change is coming about? You don't know. You know it's going to be there, but your attitude has to be that it's a challenge, you're going to survive, and you're going to prosper. And you're not doing it first person. You're doing it for the generations down the line. It's not for you, because you may not get it. You have to think it's for your children, for your grandchildren, whoever's in the future. The second one is females are as responsible as males in meeting and transcending adversity. We do not have a division of labor. If it's time to dig with a shovel, you're digging with a shovel. If it's time to be chief, you're going to be chief. That's just our attitude, whatever it is. When I went to Warm Springs, when my husband, we commuted back between his work and my work, and the women were always telling me I shouldn't be out there moving the rocks for the landscaping. I shouldn't be climbing on the roof. Well, that's the Cherokee way. The Warm Springs way is the men do it. That's not my way. And so it's hard to explain those things, but that's just the way our attitude is. If we see a man coming and he needs the door open, we run and open the door. We don't let him back into it. You know, that's not the way we do things. Now, the emphasis is on group identity and less on individual I. We try never to use the word I. It's not our perspective. It's we. What are we going to do? How are we going to accomplish this? And how can I fit into that we? What is my role? What is my responsibility? Number 4 is emphasis on cooperation and sharing and not on competition. I just cringe even now in Chinese language. When I was studying Chinese language, the person that did the best got a star. That's not the way you work in the tribal world. If you're singled out in that kind of way, we feel bothered by it. It's you're responsible, but you know, you can do just as dumb things as other people that may not have the same kind of skills. You're not immune. Now, the 5th one is the one that I think really characterizes us. Emphasis on learning and problem solving. Will Rogers is a noted comedian, I suppose cultural person in the world, and I have a book here that quotes him. He is the person who quotes him, and it's been sanctioned by the tribe. Is Will Rogers. And Will Rogers was a great spokesman in relation to cultural crossings. And he said in this, I never met a man I didn't like. First of all, you can tell the acculturation going on there, Western. He would, if he were matrilineal, his mother had told him how the world was, he would have said, I never met a person I didn't like. not a man. The next thing is he probably would have said also, I never met a living thing I didn't respect. I have trouble with spiders, but I feel awful every time I have to kill one because it might bite me and give me an infection, and then I have a big fight with the doctors. So I have to kill them. Everybody else carries them out the door. It's a strange behavior. It's respect, not like. And we Cherokees have real trouble with loving peanut butter. I hear people on the television say, oh, I love peanut butter. Love and like. You can like food in our world, but you don't love it. You like it, that's it. Don't worry about loving it. And let's see now. When he said that, I try to make out sense for you as the perspective in that respect. At the same time, we also rely on some kind of intuitive perception. As women, we are supposed to be aware of what our responsibility is in intuition. Because we are responsible, you recognize that there are things that cannot be relied upon, things that you cannot trust, so that if you feel it's not safe for you or your children, you act on that. You carry, in other words, you carry pepper spray in these times, so that you go to self-defense classes in these times. The first thing you do when you get in your car is lock the car. These are the kinds of things that have to do with intuition. What is it that you might not be able to trust as you move in the world? Because we're curious about the whole world. So we're not going to sit at home in a safe place. Safety we're not looking for. But management, can you go there and manage yourself in that particular setting? So that we're not xenophobic, but we still yet look on strangers with interest. So that what do you feel about this person? What do you feel about this? And then when do you trust in the most unusual circumstances? Because sometimes you get in very unusual circumstances. When do you trust when a person offers you help at that time, or when do you offer help to that person? Those are the kinds of problems that humans, women especially around the world, European women say about we American women that we are too friendly, that we need to be a little more cautious, a little more aware of our surroundings. The French are very judgmental about us in that way. So I find that very interesting. Now, I hope I haven't portrayed to you that Cherokees are paragons of culture. We are not. We've got as many crazy women in our Cherokee nation as anybody else does. Everybody has their Jezebel, and we have ours. Sequoyah, who gave us the greatest tool for cultural crossing, and when he wrote the syllabary, made up the syllabary, his wife tore up one day, mad, I guess, crazy, I suppose, and tore up every bit of his work, destroyed it. Every culture has one, but he kept on. He gathered all the stuff, he had it in his mind. In those days, the emphasis was on memory. So he could remember what it was he did and was able to complete that great device that he gave all of the Cherokee Nation. But we have those kind of people among us just like everybody else has. So again, use your intuition, know when to put the stuff away so that nobody's going to steal it or destroy it, and when to keep it. Thank you. I hope you know something about it. Now, if you have any questions, I'll try to answer any questions you might have. Yes?
When you talk about tracing the lineage back and these different treaty dates, were the names of all of the tribal members recorded at the times of those
See,
treaties?
that's the problem. When they married their husband, they took their name, and they didn't think probably that it was important to keep their name and be on there as that person. So a lot of people who are Cherokee cannot prove their identity.
So at the time, though, they did take a census of all the men, is that right?
Not necessarily.
No?
No. But the lineal ancestor, who is your grandfather, who is your grandmother, who is this person, and they could be on the Army census, they could be on usually the military census, kept excellent records.
Okay.
And so, but they would be of men. So you would also have to have the church records if you went to church. Because remember, Christianity was very much interested in Christianizing, proselyting among Cherokees, so that you would have those. But usually the 1905 date is the last date that most people our age would be able to go back to. That if you can get your ancestry to 1905, that's the Dawes Act. Then you had roll numbers.
Okay.
And
That's
so
what,
on the Trail of Tears, there would have been roll numbers in the military records and all of that. Then you can go back and prove. But every tribe has this. Every tribe in the United States that is recognized as a federal tribe or a federal nation will have those identities, and they'll have their cutoff line. Ours just happens to be 1905 is the final one. Any other questions?
Are the Cherokee then unique in having a written language, or is that common within other tribes? Is there a
What
written
is that?
language? A written language?
No, no. Ours was practically the only one that, I think some had some kind of dialectical phrases or things, but no written word. That's what got us in trouble a lot with the government, because we could read and write. You know, if you can read and write, educate your children and your grandchildren, for heaven's sakes, because if you can read and write and make judgments, even in contemporary times, that's very important. Yes?
I have one question. You said you can only go back to the lineage to 1905. What if your Native American in the family was born before that 1905 time?
There are rolls back there. That list that I had in
Do you
there,
have to go to a Native American search?
1839 would be one that you could go back to.
Do you have to go to a Native American search site, or do you have to do DNA, or do you have to go to Ancestry.com?
You stick with Cherokee. Cherokees do not recognize the term Native American. They do not recognize DNA.
Thank you.
Only lineal ancestor will do it, and rolls of lineal ancestry. Otherwise, it doesn't mean a thing to them. It doesn't mean a thing to most tribes. So it means something to the National Geographic Society. They're the ones with DNA. But I went to be sure. I called up the tribe and said, "Are you recognizing DNA?" They said, no, not recognizing Native American. No, doesn't work. It has to be those particular lineal kinds of ancestors. And I think I just cringe when people tell me who they are and where they're from, and they cannot prove it. And I will be attending, I hope, in April, a Cherokee conference on Cherokee genealogy, because we were around all over the world more than other people. They stayed pretty much in their locale, but we were moved from one place to another place, and so we have a lot of genes there. And I think we had a good idea of health, and in that we had 7 clans, and if you want a clear it's interesting that humans for a long time had a lot of knowledge that we think we're so smart. They knew what incest meant and what damage to the gene pool meant a long time ago. We had 7 clans that kept that gene pool as strong as we could keep it. Then when outsiders, European outsiders came in and added to the gene pool, that was even more enhancing because you have a greater chance of surviving. I wish my ancestors had been fooling around or done something, and I ended up with all these bad things, that I think, well, what in the world were you doing that you didn't keep the gene pool clean? And so, but I think it does speak to the knowledge of the people and how animals behave. You're not much greater than an animal in gene pool and survival. How strong are you? Many of you in here have cancer genes. You have heart genes that are not good. You have brain genes that are not good. And so science is helpful, but if the gene pool isn't strong, we're vulnerable. So you end up, I have cousins that have come from German descent that have a genetic. They've all had double mastectomies. So you just hope that you keep your gene pool clear. But the last thing I want to tell you is when I was a student at University of Colorado, Margaret Mead was at Greeley, I think it was, and she would come up to the University of Colorado and give us a lecture. She'd be visiting professor, and I was always interested in her term about us. I knew I was Homo sapien sapien, advanced to that, not Homo sapien, but she called all of us Homo saps. And so, I don't think we're quite that bad, but I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Very enjoyable.
Thank you.